I mean, I knew SEALs were hard, and it's a pretty easy stat to come up with. People talk about 80% of those that start don't make it. So, okay, I'll just be in the 20%. That's all. That's the only thought I gave to that. And then everything else was about training and preparing, and getting ready to go in, both mentally and physically. And then for writing too, people will say, "Do you know the odds of getting a book published?" And I don't know. It's hard, I guess. They're low, but that's it. That's all I'm going to pay attention to, because the rest of that bandwidth is going to be focused on writing, on trying to perfect the craft, to get better, to make it the best product I can possibly get it to be before I submit it to New York. So, just say, don't pay attention to the odds, and make the life you want.
Hey everybody, today my guest is former Navy SEAL turned novelist, Jack Carr. Jack is the author of the big hit, The Terminal List, and now his new book coming out this summer, True Believer. In this episode, Jack and I discuss his experience as a Navy SEAL and how it's led into his career as an author. We talk about doing hard work, focusing, and buckling down, and Jack shares why you should never look at the odds and go and make the life you want. All that and more. Let's go to the show. What does a day in the life look like for you when you're writing?
When I'm writing, okay,
Yeah.
that's a good way to think about it. So when I'm writing, really, I need to get out of the house, and that's why you caught me today at the local library. Because although I have a beautiful office at the house with an amazing view, surrounded by books and inspiration and all that, I find that just outside the doors to the office are 3 kids, a dog, and my wife, who are not so understanding about me closing the door and actually going to work and write. So I need to get out of there and go to a place that's a little more Spartan. So that's where we are today, hence the background of a whiteboard. So it's just me, my computer. I bring the first 2 books next to me in case I have to go back and reference anything. Names, how is that spelled, or how did I get the background on that person, or and then I just write. So that's pretty much it. A little notepad next to me, and take my watch off and have a little cup of coffee and some pretzels, and that's it. Start going.
So how does that contrast then against your previous life as a Navy SEAL?
Right. So, I mean, I grew up wanting to do both. And since I was a little kid, since I first found out about what SEALs were when I was 7 years old, they had me from a very early age. And I saw a movie called The Frogmen back in late 70s, early 80s. But I wasn't any more than 7 years old. And back then, we had like 4 channels. So there was like ABC, CBS, NBC, and then that one outlier channel. And on the weekend, my dad was watching football. That one outlier channel would always have a war movie on. And I didn't care at all about football, but I cared about what was on that war movie channel playing opposite football. So being the remote control in those days, at a commercial break, my dad would look at his watch and say, you have 2 minutes to go and flip that channel and watch your movie, and then you're flipping it back. So I'd go up there, I'd watch, and then 2 minutes later, he'd just be looking at his watch the whole time. Then I'd go switch it again and back to football until the next break. So one of those movies was The Frogmen, and it showed these guys that were climbing up over the beach and putting explosives on obstacles. And I asked my dad, hey, who are these guys? And he said they're frogmen, because that was the name of the movie. And I started asking a lot more questions, but he was, of course, much more interested in football. So he said, ask your mother. And she was a librarian at the time and still is today. So we went down to the local library and did some research into frogmen and SEALs and found out who they were and what they did. And I knew that was the path for me. So ever since then, I was focused through junior high school on becoming a SEAL. But back then, there wasn't that much written about SEALs, so we couldn't just put it into Google search and have thousands of things pop up. There was only a couple of books written, a couple of magazine articles, so not that much at all written about SEALs. But what was written...
That is so surprising now when there are so many SEAls who write books.
Well, yeah, exactly. There was a couple back then, but not many. And the mentions in those books were very fleeting. So you couldn't really get you weren't overwhelmed, I'll say, by the amount of information that was out there. You could actually read it all. But a lot of what I naturally gravitated to were books and movies that had protagonists with the background that I wanted to have one day. So Tom Clancy, of course, had John Clark, who had a SEAL background. David Morrell mentioned SEALs back in 1983 in a book called Brotherhood of the Rose. So I naturally gravitated to these novels that had protagonists with those backgrounds I wanted to have. So SEALs, Special Forces, CIA, whatever it was, that's what I read. So David Morrell, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Quinnell, J.C. Pollock, Tom Clancy, Nelson DeMille, all these guys are what I read growing up. And I knew that, hey, after the military, I'm going to write books like these guys. And so that was always part of my plan from a very early age. So as I started to get out of the military, and your last year in the military, your only job is to get out,
Right.
Is to figure out how to navigate this bureaucratic process and exit from the military. So I spent that time starting to write, and just wrote what I was passionate about. And this is the genre that I always wanted to write in.
Wow.
So I got very, very fortunate to be doing exactly what I want to be doing, and something I'm so passionate about.
Wow, that's incredible, and that you had that vision at a young age, and then to carry that through 20 years later. Are you just someone who's just always been so clear about things? How did you build this vision?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I didn't really consider anything else, and I never really considered the odds. I just knew, hey, somebody was a SEAL, so if somebody can do it, I'll do it. And if somebody's getting published and writing these novels, then I'll just do that too. So I never really spent any time thinking about how hard it was or what the odds are of doing it. Or, I mean, of course, I had backup plans, and of course, in the military, we had contingency plans and secondary and tertiary options. And, so, of course, I had those, but I knew I wanted to be a professional writer.
Wow.
And, so that's what I focused on.
Wow, that's incredible. And you've mentioned, I saw in the press kit for your newest book and things that Joseph Campbell was a big influence on you as well. You know, aside from, of course, the people who have the specific characters, he's got that broad idea. How did his ideas play into your work?
Yeah, so I saw something was called The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers on PBS back in 1988, and he was doing a series of interviews with Joseph Campbell, and my mom introduced me to that, and we watched it together. And of course, they talked about George Lucas and Star Wars and how he was influenced by Joseph Campbell, and that made me interested in it. And they talked about a book that he wrote, pretty much his seminal work, called Hero with a Thousand Faces. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I still have the original book that I got back in the late 80s, and it really talked about the hero and the hero's journey across cultures, and how cultures that hadn't even China, and then North American Indians, and Africa and Europe, and how all these different countries before they even had any interaction had very similar hero's journeys, where the reluctant hero goes on essentially an odyssey and emerges transformed at the end of that journey. So that was definitely something that plays in. It's not something I recently discovered. It's something that I noticed also in the works that I read and the movies that I liked growing up. So it was just a natural thing for me to do, to go back to that. And I kind of feel like I've been training myself up for this job since the beginning, since I was born, really. And from reading those today with just that lens, I have all that from the 80s and 90s, being able to have grown up and then to have studied disease and terrorism and counterinsurgencies professionally, and then the personal experience from going downrange to Iraq and Afghanistan, kind of all those things combined at the perfect time and place to allow me to write this and have it get noticed by New York.
Yeah, you've really done that for sure. And your protagonist, James Reese, how much of him was informed by these ideals of Joseph Campbell and your own experience? How did this all come together?
Right. Well, all those things are a part of me, like I said, for my entire life. And I was at a part of my time in the military, where I was not going to be taking guys downrange anymore. So I started enlisted, then I became an officer. So my last deployment to Iraq was the last time I tactically lead guys on the battlefield. After that, as a leader, you're pretty much in the tactical operations center. You're you don't lead from the front anymore, except administratively once you make the 05 level. So that's where we meet James Reese in the terminal list. He's at that stage in his life as well, and realizes that it's time for him to move on and start taking care of his family. So that's the point where, of course, disaster strikes, and he gets wrapped up in a conspiracy that he has to unravel, and then start putting everybody involved in the ground.
Yeah. And when I was preparing for this, I listened to you with Mark Devine, and you mentioned to Mark that revenge was a big theme that you knew you wanted to hit. What is it about revenge that just captures the human mind?
I don't know, but it's been something that if you look back and look at just the growing up, the movies and books that people like and that resonate with people, they seem to have this theme of revenge, and there's a conspiracy to them, and so that really resonated with me growing up. So it was the first subject I wanted to tackle, and I got this from Stephen Pressfield, and I forget if it's in one of his books or if it's in a podcast that I heard him on or one of his essays. I'm not quite sure, but of course he wrote the Afghan Campaign and Gates of Fire and Legend of Bagger Vance, and he has a bunch of, I don't know how you best describe them there, because they're not really self-help, they're books about creativity.
Yes.
And of course his is through the lens of writing, but it could be anything. It could be painting, it could be sculpting, whatever it is. And he talks about the importance of doing the work, turning pro. Talks about, hey, there's no such thing as writer's block, because you're a professional, you write. You don't hear about a dentist getting dentist block or a trucker getting trucker's block. And I really like that. But in one of these, he talks about how to stay on theme, he'd take a yellow sticky paper, write the theme of his novel on it, and put it, and I think in his case it was on his typewriter, but in my case it's on my MacBook. And so I took that advice and I wrote revenge on this little yellow sticky paper. So no matter what I was doing as I was writing that first novel, if a sentence or a chapter or a paragraph or whatever it was didn't somehow directly or indirectly tie back to that theme, then it was gone. So essentially I was editing. They say not you're supposed to edit as you go, but I kind of do, because I wanted the best product possible to put in front of it gets to New York. So I think it made it a lot easier at the end to go back, because the whole time I stayed on theme. And so I did that with the second novel as well, with redemption being the theme of that one, and I'm working on the third right now, and have the same thing going on. So I think it helps you really stay on track. It was a good piece of advice.
Yeah. How did you come up with redemption as being where you wanted to go with the second one?
So I think each one has to going back to Joseph Campbell and having that hero's journey. So I thought of it as, hey, this isn't just going to be a standalone. I want to have a character that continues, that people can identify with. Yeah. And so I wanted to make him somebody that you'd want to have a beer with, but they could also flip the switch and get the job done. So I thought, okay, each book has to have those elements of the hero's journey, but also the series as a whole has to have that, no matter how long it goes. And people are, I think, Lee Child's on book number 23 right now. I think Brad Thor's on 17 or 18. But so how do you make each individual novel fit that profile? And then also, how do you make it as a series, kind of longer term, fit that as well? So there's almost two odysseys going on at the same time.
Yeah, a story arc within a story arc.
Exactly. So that's definitely something that's at the forefront of my mind as I'm writing. Is how does this particular story fit into that? Have those elements of the hero's journey, and then how does this entire series, no matter how long it goes, also fit that story arc? So that's something that I'm constantly thinking about.
Yeah. So do you then build characters with these open ends? Because I've read the second one now, and I see things that are coming back together that I wouldn't have predicted. Do you have this web kind of in mind as you're going, or do you have to go back and pull it?
Both. So I have an idea. Like for the second one, I had I don't want to ruin. Sorry, for the third one, I don't want to ruin the second one by talking too much about what I'm working on today, which is where my mind is right now. But I had this idea of one of the characters from the second novel was going to be a major player in the third. And as I was writing, it just felt forced. So one of these characters that needs to kind of be dealt with from the second novel is going to live to fight another day, because I didn't want to just force it in there. And I think there'll be it'll be fun to play with that going forward in a fourth, fifth, or wherever it naturally we can naturally make his next appearance. So yeah, those are things that I'm constantly juggling, and I have of course I haven't planned it out, a 20-book series, but I have about 6 or 7 different ones on my computer right now. Because when I started, I had about 6 or 7 different ideas to start, and I had about a page synopsis of each one. And then I chose the one that I thought would resonate with people the most, and that's the one that I started with. But so all those other ones now, initially some of them had different characters or whatever. Now I can morph some of those into this storyline with the characters that I chose to kick this off with in the first novel.
Okay. And Jack, something I saw on the press kit, and you and I talked about a little bit before we started, is that some of the second book is influenced by your personal experience. What can you say about that?
Well, I'll say that. So the first one, really, even though it is 100% fiction, the emotions that's feels comes from things that I felt downrange. So over the last 20 years, I just pulled from those real world experiences, but I pulled the emotions from them and then applied those to a fictional narrative. So I think that's why it's been resonating with people, maybe why it resonated with Simon and Schuster when they read it for the first time, because those emotions are real. It's not me talking to somebody about, hey, how does it feel to do this downrange? Or what does this feel like in combat? It's like I get to take those feelings and then apply them to this narrative, which actually ended up being a very therapeutic process. And
I bet.
I didn't expect that at the outset. I thought I was just going to write a great story, and I wanted it to be fun and be something people could grab before they went on vacation. And I didn't really realize that I would be. It wasn't the plan originally to be pulling from these real world experiences. That just naturally happened as I started to write. So for the second one, it is based on an actual event, and it's something that happened in Iraq in 2006. And there's a character in there that I worked with that I fictionalized. And based on this event in Iraq, I thought, hey, what if I was to make this a lot more interesting and fictionalize this? And so it was really inspired by that person and that event in Iraq in 2006. And then in reading the book behind you, Accidental Superpower, it was an amazing book. And I read that in summer of 2016. So right when I was starting to write this book, actually, I started this one before I even submitted the first one to Simon and Schuster, because there's just too many examples of people whose first books don't make it out of the gate. John Grisham is probably the most famous example that people would know. He wrote Time to Kill first, and he couldn't give that thing away.
Really?
And then, so he could have stopped. He could have stopped then, and we wouldn't have the firm, we wouldn't have Pelican Brief, we wouldn't have the client, we wouldn't have any of those. Yeah. And he'd still be, practicing law, probably miserable in some office somewhere. But instead, he wrote a second novel. He wrote The Firm. And that one hit with people, and that one took off. And of course, Tom Cruise was in the movie. Right. But then when you go back and you read A Time to Kill, I'd say, and I haven't read some of his more recent stuff, but say his first 10 novels I did read. And I think A Time to Kill is arguably his best one. That's the one. I love that book. And but I never would have read it had he not persevered, and had he not overcome that adversity, and had he not written that second one. So I started writing True Believer in the summer of 2016 before I even submitted to Simon & Schuster. I submitted The Terminal List in the fall of 2016. But I always knew I was going to at least write two. And if neither of them hit, then I was going to reevaluate, and we're going to go to that secondary or possibly tertiary option post-military. But so it's been a long time in the works, and I'm excited to get it out there this summer.
Yeah. And how did you work it through the government approval and everything? That seems like kind of a slow and, still that bureaucracy, even though you're out. How did that go?
They get you. So I wanted to make sure I was honoring my former security clearances by doing the right thing. And even though this is fiction, there've been some more high-profile nonfiction books that have come out that caused a lot of controversy, and so I just wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing. So when you interpret the regulation conservatively with people that have had these TS, top secret, SCI clearances, they're by design worded very broadly. Like a lot of our laws, that lets the government essentially be able to interpret them the way they want in a very broad fashion. So this one says anything intended for public release. Okay, so what is that? Is that every Instagram post?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, so you can interpret that, or you can take a look at case law in general. You can take a look at that regulation. You can take a look at precedents. There are other things to look at. But in this particular case, because of the timing and because of how close it was to some of those other books that had come out in the nonfiction space, I wanted to make sure that I was doing the right thing. And so I submitted it. And the first one took 45 days, which I thought was pretty good because they advertised 30, which is fairly ambitious of them, but 45. So I said, that's pretty good. That's it. For a government bureaucracy, that's not bad. So I figured it would be probably about the same for the next one. I said, it'll take 2 months, 3 at the latest. They ended up taking 7 months to go through True Believer. So that's why it's not out now. It was supposed to come out April 2nd. Instead, we missed our deadlines because the government had it for so long, and now it's coming out July 30th. So, so all those redactions in there are fairly arbitrary. And this time, I'm actually appealing it. First one I didn't appeal. Second one, True Believer, I'm appealing. They give you a year to appeal it. So everything in there that's blacked out, you can actually find, except for one word, you can find on government websites. So my attorneys have found everything in there that's blacked out on government web, not just on Wikipedia or something, on actual government websites. So we're appealing it and giving them all those examples line by line, word by word, and showing them, hey, this is where you can find it on your own websites. And if they come back and we win on appeal, then when the paperback publishes, we'll be able to publish it without those redactions.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to build it up too much because people will be very let down, I think. They see what the government actually took out. It's not some crazy secrets, but it's more interesting what they took out. And why. So that'll be the reason for people to look at both maybe and try to figure out, why would they take this out? Why would they think that needed to come out and then only now on appeal be able to publish it? So it'll be more fun for people in that respect.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the redacted parts, seeing the blacked out, that it also makes me feel like, oh, I'm looking at a special document or something. There's a hint of mystery behind it.
Sure. I think it adds a little bit of credibility and authenticity to it. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, I think it helps a bit, but it is also kind of I guess annoying to have the government still have that leash on you and to have to push a release date for a novel because they're not big readers at the Pentagon. Right. So it's just how it goes.
Right. Yeah. Well, as a fellow veteran too, I just want to say, like, I feel very much at home when I read your books because you talked about those emotions that you feel and the frustrations, the things with government acquisition, but at the same time, the bonds that people have in the military and things. And just want to say, like, I really feel like you nailed that. And thank you so much for putting that into your work.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's one of the differentiating factors is that they are kind of reading like they are nonfiction, even though they're obviously total fiction. Yeah. But and for me, it's very helpful to be able to write what you know and to explore those emotions. And I was a little worried, am I going to get everything? Is everything going to come out in this first novel? But that wasn't the case. It makes it into the second and the third that I'm working on right now. I guess there's no shortage of emotions from the battlefield that I can keep putting into these novels and keep exploring. So I feel very fortunate to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And another place where you really bring the authenticity is the discussion of snipers. You yourself were a sniper. How did you pick that as your line of work?
I think I was always fascinated with it, and I knew I was going that direction. But I read all the guys I mentioned earlier. They were kind of what I read in the 80s, and then I discovered Stephen Hunter before I came into the military. And Stephen Hunter, of course, created the character Bob Lee Swagger with the book Point of Impact. The movie Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, the USA TV show Shooter is based on that. And he's an amazing guy, and I've been a huge fan since I first cracked the cover to his first novel. And he came out of the gate, gave me a blurb from my first novel. Was so enthusiastic about it, and now our novels come out on the same day this summer. So July 30th. Yeah. And he asked me to blurb his new one called Game of Snipers. And he's just such a great guy. So we're going to kick our tours off together at Poison Pen in Phoenix the day before publication. So on July 29th, we'll be there. And Mark Graney, who does the Gray Man series, which is an amazing series, is going to interview us both. And Mark's become a dear friend, and we're both huge Stephen Hunter fans. So it's going to be really cool for the three of us to be there. But point being that Bob the Nailer, Bob Lee Swagger, his protagonist for most of his novels, is a sniper from Vietnam, and just an incredible character, and really an iconic character in this type of fiction. So that I'm sure that just shows the influence of popular fiction. Is that reading these novels, reading a book like that can really inspire you to go do something. Same thing with movies. They're powerful. They inspire people to go do things, take paths in life they might not necessarily take. But being a sniper was something that appealed. I don't know, for a variety of reasons, but it's such one, I think before you go into the military, you think of snipers as being that lone person that's out there. Because especially when I came in, I was reading books about Vietnam and reading about snipers in Vietnam that would go out in two-man pairs. Typically, special forces guys or Marine snipers would go out with that sniper-spotter combination into the jungle, lay up for days at a time, take their shots, and then sneak back out to extract. And so I always thought that was appealing, to be away from the flagpole, away from the officers, out there doing the job on your own. There's something I like about being out there on my own. So it appealed in that sense. So as soon as I could go to sniper school, which was right after my first platoon, I went to sniper school, the Naval Special Warfare 1. So I think it was about 73 days when I went through. And then when I became an officer, it really helped out because there weren't that many officers that had that sniper background. Mm-hmm. So that allowed me to really take sniper teams into places in Iraq and do the job for real. So it was a good background to have. And then now I can, although I do check all the stuff in the book, because right now I feel like there are some things out there in the military that I assumed that I knew. And then I look up, hey, what does that really mean? I look it up and it's like, and the acronym, something's off.
Oh yeah.
So I do check all this stuff, and make sure that it's right. I'm sure there'll be errors somewhere along the line from people that really know what they're doing on a certain subject. We'll find them, but for the most part, I think I got it right.
Yeah, I bet. And those always evolve too. And the acronyms are changing and different from community to community.
Yeah, exactly. Usually the Army has it right, though. Usually it's us that are kind of messing around and screwing them up and think we're right. But in my research, the big green machine is usually the one that dictates the doctrine.
That's fair. Yeah. And you mentioned movies. I don't know. Is this a spoiler? But do you have any thoughts of a movie?
So it's been optioned and hasn't been announced yet. So so I definitely don't want to be the one to announce it. So hopefully we can announce something soon. But I'm very excited. Of course, I know I'm keeping my expectations very low, and I know that the morning of starting to film, the thing can derail. So I'm keeping expectations very low. But what's cool is they never tell you if you read books about writing or about anything really, they tell you don't picture somebody in the role, particularly when you're talking about writing. Don't picture somebody playing your character. I create him anyway, for whatever reason. But as a child of the '80s, I found that almost impossible to do. And I definitely pictured a person playing this character, and it's strange because up to that point, he hadn't really done anything that would make you think that this would be the role for him. And so it was totally random. But there was only one. And then before the first book even came out, I had 3 movie deals on the table. And one of them was from this person.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy. So I thought, okay, that's the one to go with. For whatever reasons, something's telling me to pick this one. Yeah. And so I did. And so things are moving along. So we'll see.
Wow. That's incredible. I think so much of what we talked about, your story really speaks to your vision. You seem to have a vision for yourself and your work that seems to keep coming through. What suggestions would you have for people who are trying to craft that vision for themselves?
Yeah, so I'd say make the life you want. And of course, you're going to run into adversity along the way. Things are going to derail you, and you have to get back up. And it's all about getting back up after you're knocked down or you fall down or whatever it is, and keep getting after it. So I really think that making the life you want and knowing that you can, especially in this country, we have that option, we have that opportunity. And in most of the rest of the world, they do not have that option to make the lives they want. So we're very fortunate in this country where we can do that. So take advantage of it and make the life that you want. And at the same time, don't pay attention to the odds. If I paid attention to the odds, I certainly wouldn't have become a SEAL, and I certainly wouldn't have tried to dive into publishing, because everyone tells you, do you know the odds of becoming a SEAL, or do you know the odds of getting a book published by Simon & Schuster? And I always say, no, I have no idea, because I didn't waste any bandwidth focused on that piece of it. I knew SEALs were hard, and it's a pretty easy stat to come up with. People talk about 80% of those that start don't make it. So, okay, I'll just be in the 20%. That's all. That's the only thought I gave to that. Yep. And then everything else was about training and preparing, getting ready to go in, both mentally and physically. And then for writing too, people will say, do you know the odds of getting a book published? And I don't know. It's hard, I guess. They're low, but that's it. That's all I'm going to pay attention to. Because the rest of that bandwidth is going to be focused on writing, on trying to perfect the craft, to get better, to make it the best product I can possibly get it to be before I submit it to New York. So, just say, don't pay attention to the odds and make the life you want.
Wow. Incredible advice. Jack, I don't normally do this, but I wondered, could we do a few sort of rapid fire questions?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. What they really
I keep looking at the books behind you. I keep getting distracted by all those books behind you. I love it.
Oh, really?
I'm usually surrounded by books too. And, no, I love it. That's
thanks.
Awesome. I see a few of my favorites back there.
Thanks. What are some of your favorites?
Oh, well, I'm going to put it on the website. I'm going to get them up there soon because people keep asking me
Yeah.
about this. But the one I've gifted most is Once an Eagle by Anton. And it's a book written in 1968. So it's pretty much, if you think about the time in which it was written, it's like an anti-war novel. But it looks at two guys from right before World War One up until Vietnam. And one's an enlisted guy and one's an officer, kind of a staff officer. And the guy that's the enlisted guy gets a battlefield commission in World War One on the battlefield, and it follows their career path. And the prior enlisted guy is always just one step behind that staff officer, that political animal, and actually use a term in the first book, Massengale-esque, because the antagonist in the book, his last name is Massengale. So I threw that in there for those in the know in the first novel. But that is my number one book, and the one that I gift the most. I give it to my junior officers in the teams, and I write a letter to them in the front that talks about why I'm giving this to them. And then I put another one in the back, and I'd seal that one in an envelope, and I'd attach it to the back of the inside cover of that back of the book, and sealed. So I'd write in the letter in the front, say, hey, you have to read the book in order to get to my letter at the end. So only after you read this novel can you get to my letter at the end, and then that'll give you my take on what you just read. Because I didn't want to spoil it ahead of time. I didn't want them to ruin their reading experience or their interpretation of what they were going to read. Because really, it's historical fiction, but it's really a case study in leadership, if you look at it that way.
Yeah.
And so that's why I thought it was important for my junior officers and my senior enlisted guys in the team. So I gift that a lot. Of course, Winds of War, War and Remembrance. Those by Herman Wouk, who just passed away 10 days shy of his 104th birthday, just a few days ago. Yeah. So he wrote The Caine Mutiny, of course. You probably know him from that movie with Humphrey Bogart. But The Winds of War, War and Remembrance, once again, historical fiction, another two of my favorites. And then Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead. So those are my five top, my favorite novels of all time.
Wow, that idea with the letter in the back too. I'm going to use that. I'm totally going to use that now because I love to give books.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, it's and people, it shows you put a lot of thought into that. So giving the gift of a book or a weapon to me are the most thoughtful things that you can gift to somebody. But attaching the letter to the front and the back, kind of it's kind of puts the punctuation on it, I guess, and illustrates just how much thought you put into it and how important you think it is when you give somebody something like that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I had some rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
I wanted to know your thoughts on James Reese versus a few other icons.
All right.
So James Reese head to head in a fight with Jack Bauer. Who do you think wins?
I think they're on the same team. So I think they're going to be part of the same fire team, and they'll talk about maneuvering and flanking.
Probably.
So I'd have to say they're on the same team there.
Okay. How about in a shooting competition with Bob Lee Swagger?
That's a tough one because Bob Lee Swagger is essentially a literary icon and hero of mine. So I want to put James Reese as the new Bob Lee Swagger as far as skill goes. But you got to watch out for the old war horses. They've got that wisdom, they've got that experience. And James Reese is right on the cusp of I kind of leave it vague, but turning 40. And moving on in years. So he's starting to look back on his experience and develop some wisdom from that. So I'd like to look at him as kind of a Bob Lee of the new generation.
Yeah. Okay. How about James Reese versus John Clark in a contest to see just who can accomplish a mission? Tactical knowledge.
Man. Oh man! Once again, you're pulling out all my favorites. So once again, these guys are on the same team, but they're all those people that you talked about. They all influenced, I think, James Reese because they're all books and characters that influenced me. So a lot of those traits probably ended up in James Reese and in me somehow because of that influence. But John Clark is just a classic character, obviously, and Without Remorse is one of my favorite novels. I always wanted there to be an origin story after he first made his appearance in I think it was Cardinal of the Kremlin. by Tom Clancy. But when they did the origin story with Without Remorse, oh man, that was a good day when I found out about that. I was there to buy it on day one.
Yeah.
So So once again, those guys are peers. He'd be like the mentor to James Reese as James Reese moves on in years.
Sure. Yeah. There's always rumors of a Without Remorse movie too out.
I know. Since the beginning, like since it first came out, so we've been waiting 20 plus years, 25 years now for that, maybe more.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. James Reese versus you in your prime in a shooting competition.
Definitely James Reese.
Okay.
Yeah. No, he's got to be. He's better than me in all respects. So smarter, faster, stronger, more witty, better looking. That's the definitely better version. So he wins.
Very humble of you. Well, Jack, if people want to learn more from you, they want to check out your stuff, where should they look for you online?
Right. So I'm fairly new to this social media thing. Being in the military and being in special operations, I always kept it at arm's length for security reasons. So I'm brand new to all this, and I guess I've been at it maybe a year and a half now. But I am Jack Carr, USA, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And where I really interact with people, though, is on Instagram and Twitter. The Facebook is I count, but my tech website guy just kind of put some things on there because 3 was too many. So 2 is almost too many. And I really want to thank everybody that reaches out to me. So I try to get back to everybody and answer every comment. And because really word of mouth is what has made the first novel such a success. Yeah. I didn't come from a background in politics or sports or something that gave me a platform. I had 0 platform. So I owe everybody that read the first novel and told a friend about it. I owe them, and I'll never forget what they did to make this a success. So I try to thank everyone, and when people come to signings, I try to spend time with each and every person and write something personal to them. So Instagram and Twitter are the main ones, but there is a Facebook if that's where people are. And then my website is officialjackcarr.com. And on that one, you can sign up for a newsletter. So I try to get a newsletter out every 2 months or so. So I don't want to inundate people with things, but a newsletter that kind of gives some gear reviews of what I'm doing, what I'm reading, what knives I'm using, guns I'm using, that sort of thing. Just talk about things that are interesting to me in a little video, and then kind of have some things on there with podcasts I've been on or interesting articles that have come out or whatever. So people can sign up for that newsletter on officialjackcarr.com. And there's a lot of stuff on there for people that want to get in the weeds on weapons, about knives and sniper rifles and M4s and all that stuff. They can go to the website, and there's articles on all those things where you can really get deep in the weeds on it. So that's all there for everybody to explore.
Great. And we'll be sure to put some links to that stuff down in the show notes too on the episode. Awesome. So get that out.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Jack, I know you're in the throes of writing your 3rd book. I want to let you get back to work. Just got one last question.
Yeah.
What do you think a leader can do to create a team culture where people can focus and get their work done the way that you're so committed to?
Well, the culture piece is an interesting one. So it's really giving people the autonomy to do that work. But before you do that, you need to build trust. So it's building trust both up and down that chain of command, essentially. So it's using every single interaction you have with somebody, whether it's a 2-minute conversation in the hallway, whether it's a brief to senior level leaders, or it's running the obstacle course with your guys, or getting on the range with them, doing some shooting competitions, whatever that is. Each and every one of those are opportunities to interact and build trust. So senior level leaders are like, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to leave him alone, kind of on the battlefield. Leave the guys alone because I trust him, and he's going to get the mission done. And then with the guys, the way you explain things to them, the way you frame things, the way you listen to them, make yourself a better leader because of the things you're learning from them, all help develop trust. So it's first about building that foundation of trust. And then as far as the second part of that question, it's letting those guys go off and do things autonomously. So it's letting them alone to do the job because you trust them to do it based on some left and right ones, of course.
Very cool. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I sincerely appreciate it. And we will talk again soon.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for watching this episode with Jack Carr. If you want to help me get more great guests like this on the show, then be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.